In our ongoing series of critical thinking skills, I want to talk about how panic buying works. Right now, the coronavirus is inducing folks, it seems, to buy toilet paper, for example. And if you understand how the human behavior works around panic buying, you can actually use this to your advantage, or you can use it to help people. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Don't get me wrong, using this to your advantage can help people because panic buying and understanding the philosophies or the methods behind panic buying can help you reduce inventory in a situation where you've got a liability coming up. So, for example, if you're a grocery store and there's a hurricane coming, it's really good to have that panic buying clean out your warehouse so that if there is a disaster, those materials are in the hands of individuals rather than in a central warehouse where it could be damaged or difficult to get to in a situation where people need those materials. So what happens in a panic buying situation is you have some kind of fear, then you have some kind of limits or controls imposed, then you have an overstimulation either reinforced by the fear or by the limits where people basically buy out everything. Right now, toilet paper was the big thing related to the coronavirus, which is an upper respiratory infection. You don't need toilet paper when there's an upper respiratory infection. In fact, there's probably about 25 different things in your house you can use in place of toilet paper. And I'll just give you one example. The Sears catalog of the day used to be toilet paper in rural communities. My point being is that toilet paper is actually a non-essential item, yet it's sold out like crazy. Now, maybe tissues would make more sense. Well, you can use toilet paper as tissues. Maybe there's a number of factors in place, but a large number of people saw the value in having toilet paper, bought up as much toilet paper as they could get, and therefore, when supply was limited, the demand continued and increased. Now, the actual demand may not have increased. People may have just bought up because they couldn't get to a grocery store, and how inconvenient would it be not to have toilet paper? But there's things to understand here. First off, you have some gain to benefit by knowing the behavior, but panic buying actually stems out of crisis and political events and other activities. So even though the panic buying can be behind us, like the storm is past and now everybody's back to normal buying, you could know of an event pending, like hurricanes in the August season on the Eastern Shore, and being aware of the behavior of panic buying could allow you to have adequate supplies in your store versus a customer going to a different store. If you're in the supply chain business or the banking industry or in one of these other environments where you're considered an essential service, you want to make sure that you have staff capacities in place. So again, if there's a trigger, such as a storm, a crisis, or some kind of political event, could even just be fear in the marketplace, that could be an indicator that there will be a rush on panic buying in the near future. Anytime there are artificial controls, the artificial controls in the environment, such as the oil crisis in the 1970s, there was a limited volume of oil, but restricting oil and gasoline at the pumps of gas stations, service stations all across the United States started a media storm around this risk. So people started lining up early, and then other people saw others lining up early, and then all of a sudden there's big giant lines at the gas pump. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you were aware of this, you could have bought options into gas and oil futures and basically made a huge fortune. I actually met an individual who owned a petroleum distribution company back in the 70s, and this guy's a pretty old guy, and he was telling some stories, and basically what he foresaw was a limited supply, so he built up capacity. He basically topped off all the tanks that he had, and he bought rights to fuel futures basically so that he could have fuel available for his customers. He modeled 2x his customers. Now, modeling is an important thing here. If you see something coming, you can model it on paper. But he modeled 2x his customers, and none of his customers, his commercial customers, had to wait for fuel during the 70s crisis. So everybody else is panicking and freaking out, while his customers that were hospitals and diesel generators for hospitals, emergency services vehicles, commercial fleets, those people had the fuel that they needed when they need it, because he was able to secure that opportunity in advance. Now, he was able to get premium prices on his sale because he had other costs and a risk associated with the crisis lasting a little bit longer and running out of materials and souring that customer relationship. I won't get into the supply and demand that impacts pricing because that's a touchy subject right now, and a lot of folks in the general public don't understand the risk associated with buying a large quantity of something in anticipation for an event and then being the source or the provider during the event. There's a lot of risk in that because there's going to be times when that trigger event doesn't happen or the trigger event doesn't happen right away. Like my household already had like 50 rolls of toilet paper. I buy toilet paper twice a year. I have a kind of a household management model that we talk about in some of my other newsletters where I basically, just like having a janitorial service, a giant box of toilet paper shows up, it goes in a pantry, giant box of paper towels goes in a pantry. Everything that is purchased is in individually wrapped paper containers, highly recyclable containers, and I'm paying like half the price of regular toilet paper by buying it out once or twice a year. See, if you're a high-income professional or an entrepreneur, you've got the opportunity to buy right. And that often helps you avoid some of these back and forth. The key is that fear, that panic, that limit, that controls, they create activity in the marketplace. They create actions. And those actions are very often detrimental if you haven't had the insight to monitor that human behavior, to observe what's going on, and to kind of be ahead of that curve. And a lot of times what happens too is that the mass majority of people, they focus on short-term needs rather than long-term needs. And that's a huge mistake. So when they see a storm coming last minute, they're going to go out and buy up stuff. They show up at the store and there's extra people there and they think, uh-oh, I don't want those people to get my stuff. And they go ahead and buy more than they normally would or possibly more than they need. A recent Wall Street Journal article covered in UK, there's a big problem with perishable foods going to the dump because folks stocked up on perishables before the coronavirus lockdown, and now many of those foods have not been eaten, and they're being put in the organic recycling to go out on the street rather than going into eating. And many of those things would have still been viable product, or they could have been turned into value-add product, or they could have been more evenly distributed through the consumer base if they had remained in the stores a little bit longer, rather than this panic buy where everybody buys up stuff. Now, unfortunately, toilet paper is non-perishable, and as long as you keep it dry, it'll last for years. But my point being is by focusing on the short term, sometimes people overbuy, and then they're influenced by conditions such as that day they showed up at the store, there were more people than if they showed up on a different day of the week. And finally, there's that problem that if we have our basically if your self-determination, your ability to think is muted by some authority telling you what to do all the time, eventually you're not going to be proactive and you won't go out and do what's necessary to get results. So that's why inside strategic relations, we are always talking about your ability to think, your ability to develop a locus of control, your ability to command a situation, your ability to be that authority or that leader so that you can get people the right information and move in the right direction. A lot of the stimulus package that the government's doing today is basically subsidies for the grocery stores. Because when you increase people's EBT, which is their benefits associated with food programs, that money either goes to farmers, which tends to be large commercial scale farms, not regional farms that can supply during a problem like this. It also tends to go to manufactured food, manufactured drink, which again is often imported. So then that subsidy to people so that they can buy food becomes subsidy to foreign corporations which supply the food. Now, you guys know I advocate for a regional food system that has small farms, small producers. It has small and medium-sized value-added producers. It has farmers markets, small groceries, local foods in a grocery chain, for example. Because if something goes bad in the Midwest, the East Coast will still have food, and vice versa. And then we can always ship the food if there is an emergency situation, where today it seems pretty standard to ship the food. But now let's talk about how this benefits you, because there are three clear steps you can do to make you gain a better advantage in the situation. Disaster is always opportunity. I tell clients all the time. So don't think I'm trying to be opportunistic here. You know that I am. So here's the first one. If you have clear goals and objectives, if your core goal and objective is to provide food and shelter to your family over any other goal, you'll tend to be able to do that because you'll think ahead. If you want food and shelter today versus you want food and shelter over the next 10 years, those are different planning scenarios. If you're in a situation where you need food and shelter today, you want to be looking past that immediate food and shelter. You want to look past, that getting for now and being sure that you're established a position. And this happens in survival situations. You want to make sure the food that you eat isn't going to make you sick. And so you want to get the calories, but you don't want to get sick in a position where you lose the calories or you cause additional problems down the line. That unintended consequence needs to be thought about in advance. Number 2 is you're going to focus, again, is on that long-term perspective. Number 3 is you're going to know how to adapt responsively. This is not about accepting change. Change is imposed upon a person. Adaptation is your adjustments to the environment done at an individual level. Now, how does all this roll up together? Well, if you're a grocery store, you want a run on the grocery stores. You want to get all the food out of the grocery store. You want to get all the food out of the warehouse. You want to get all the food in the hands of customers because the money is more portable. Now, this is important. The money's more portable, and it'll allow you to buy in more supplies. See, the grocery store doesn't know that this might be the last delivery of fresh vegetables. And so they need to get the money for the vegetables they've got, use that money then to find alternate sources of vegetables so that if their main sources get contaminated or have problems, then they can still get product to their customers. Ultimately, it is about serving the customer, but there's a procurement model in here where you've got to manage inventory so that you don't end up with a warehouse of something you can't move and then later would have to discount. So you'd have the cost of warehousing and the cost of discount. If you're a grocery store, you want to make sure that people can get in and out across your customer demographics. So a lot of grocery stores with the COVID have opened up the mornings for seniors. The problem is now you're concentrating seniors who are most vulnerable for a upper respiratory infection. And you're also interacting with employees who are interacting with general populations and equipment that's general populations. So even if you clean the place, let the seniors in, and then clean the place again, you've now increased the probability of an infection because you're concentrating the risk category. Now, I know if that's a bunch of risk management mumbo-jumbo, I'll tell you at the end how you can ask your questions. I love to answer questions, and I will admit that I'm not always as clear as I can be in a second or third revision when it comes to some of these topics. But my point being is that you want to serve your customer categories, and often the solutions, the actions you take based on fear, based on limits and controls, might not be the right solution. So maybe a better solution is curbside delivery for seniors, and that's all through the day so that you're spreading out the seniors, and then you're actually making times available to do other activities or things that are not risk category based. They're instead reducing the risk. And that might include not putting a restriction on times, because once you put a restriction on times, anytime you limit the supply, the demand always increases. If you tell a population of people, do not leave your homes, do not interact with people, do not go to large groups, then you're going to have 1,000 people get together on a church service. You're going to have people going to the park and interacting with each other at parks, and you're going to have people going and doing things they're not supposed to be doing. Now, if your intention is to ratchet up a situation, then you can impose controls in order to get if you understand the behavior, you can impose the control to get a flood of demand. So, for example, Rolex watch. There aren't millions of Rolex watches being manufactured every year. They found their sweet spot as far as a production and profitability is concerned. So simply limiting access to the Rolex watch can make it worth more, because today with technology, you can make a similar quality watch and sell it at less. But why would you when you can make a similar quality watch, limit distribution, through authorized retailers or through service channels, and then add a story to it to make it more appealing. So if there's a bottom line to what I'm sharing with you today, is that you have to be aware of human behavior to discover trends, to beat those trends, and to be prepared. However, you don't want to fall a part of those trends and then fall into something that doesn't serve your long-term interests, that doesn't serve your individual goals and objectives, and doesn't drive forward your ability to adapt and respond to situations. When you're able to adapt and respond to situations, you're able to leverage relationships, you're able to leverage the resources you already have, and you're able to drive up to that next level as we teach here at Inside Strategic Relations. I'm Justin Hitt. If you have questions about this or any other program, visit me at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. Be well, take care of yourself. I'm here to help you create and keep profitable customers and transform business relationships, guaranteed. Now, as long as they have this quarantine and everybody's stuck in the house, you're welcome to again visit me at www.insidestrategicrelations.com, and I've got a number of webinars, some newsletter materials, and other resources that we'll make available to you in exchange for your questions. Simply ask a question. I'll do my best to answer it. Again, thanks for listening. And this has been about how panic buying works and maybe how you can use it to your advantage or to help those who need those materials the most. And it really goes down to human behavior. What are the triggers? What are the things that cause the buying? And how can we leverage that in the long-term outcomes we desire?